Hello and welcome back to Behind the Toys with me, Jacob's Toys. Please do like, share, subscribe and all of those things. All support is very much appreciated. And in this episode, it is very X-Men the Animated Series heavy, as I have got the fantastic opportunity of sitting down with Eric and Julia Lewald. So without further ado, let's get straight into that interview with them both. If you are familiar with the X-Men animated series that's now streaming on Disney Plus, then of course you will know the two people that are my guests today. It is, of course, Eric and Julia Lewald. How are you both?
Happy to be talking to you right now.
Yes, brilliant. Yes, love talking about the show. Glad you had us on.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant stuff. Thank you ever so much for coming on. So for anybody that might not know, because you say X-Men, you say animated X-Men, you can think of all the heroes and all the rest of it, but people don't necessarily always know the people that are behind the scenes and doing the things and putting the shows on. So just for the sake of anybody that might not know, could you just tell us what it was that you did or what your involvement was on the show?
Yeah, Julia Lewald here, and I'm a TV animation writer, live action writer, and wrote specific episodes for X-Men the Animated Series during its 5-year run. And I got to be basically a fly on the wall for the whole duration of it.
Yeah, it's wow. Nice married to the head guy. I was hired to develop the show, to decide how it was going to look and play out and who's going to be in it, whatever, and then supervise the writing. It ended up being 76 episodes. At the time, we thought it was going to be 13 because, strangely, in 1992, not that many people knew who the X-Men were. And almost nobody in Hollywood believed it could be successful. All those Marvel comic books, nobody watches that stuff. They'll never make a TV show, never make movies, just small chance. But so my job was, it's kind of like the general contractor. I hire the writers, which is great because there's one in-house. And they, in effect, write for me, and I get it on to the people of the network and to Marvel and everyone, take everybody's notes and fight off the bad ones and try to work with the good ones. And so I was much more the managing writer, kind of like the general contractor building a subdivision, 76 different houses that had to kind of fit in and be the same, but they had to have, each one had to be different and fresh. So I was more the supervisor with the headaches and would fix the writing when it wasn't wonderful. Or when I get up to someone like Julia, it's just, oh, that's good, pass it on. Those are two positions. You wrote for the show and I was in charge of the writers.
And just a point here, speaking to you in February 2022, it was officially February 1992 when Eric got tapped to come in for a meeting that was to be the development of X-Men the Animated
The phone
series.
call actually was February 16th, the night of February 16th, 1992. That's exactly 30 years ago right now.
No way.
We got the call and they said,
wow,
you're coming by and Stanley and everybody's going to be there and you're going to have to explain what your X-Men idea for the X-Men show is. And I had to whisper, to the guy that's hiring me and say, I don't really know the comic book very well at all. And he said, just keep your mouth shut and get through the 3 hours. We'll get you some copies and you can catch up in the next couple of days, but you'll be good. Don't worry.
That's amazing.
30 years ago today.
Wow, that's amazing. No, I didn't know that, but that's what an amazing thing to kind of be able to celebrate with you. 30 years. Because I knew that it was around October time in '92, I believe that it officially aired, which means that, like you say, 2022 marks the 30th anniversary, which seems crazy because yes, it's on Disney Plus. I know they had a bit of an issue with the continuity and episodes being in the wrong places, for anybody that did follow it. But there was enough people out there that was kind of putting guides out and going, if you're watching it on Disney Plus, watch this episode and this episode. But for it to be 30 years and to still be holding strong as such an incredible animation, such an incredible piece of storytelling. I believe as well, if I've got my facts right, it was one of the longest running shows, if not the longest running on Fox Kids as well. So, 5 seasons, wasn't it? And as you say, 76 episodes, which is just absolutely insane. I've got to say, obviously, as somebody over here in the UK, my introduction, I mean, I've told this story a million times to most of the people I speak to, but my introduction to kind of Marvel and to superheroes was through comic books. And it was my grandmother that used to take me down to the boot sale, which is, the equivalent of the flea market in the States. And they would have there was a stall there where this guy sold like real American comics. So they were your comic books from your comic book stores, and he would sell them in bundles of like 5 for £1. So you could go down and you could pick them up. But they wouldn't follow. The stories wouldn't follow. So it was much like Disney Plus's kind of version of X-Men. It was just randomly thrown together. But, so I was introduced to all of these different heroes, but there was no kind of continuation in the story. So for me, X-Men, the animated series, actually filled in so many blanks in story arcs and kind of pieced things together. So it was incredibly important for me personally, because it kind of solidified those story arcs and kind of okay, so that's why this character did this, and that's why this person was introduced here. And the same goes for Spider-Man as well, the Spider-Man animated show, because that was obviously a very strong contender in the running of kind of long running animated Marvel shows. So thank you very much. So to be able to say personally thank you for filling in those blanks, that's amazing. I know you guys have got a couple of books out as well. I mean, the most recent one is, I think you've got a copy there behind you. I couldn't find my copy. I think my son's got it at the moment. Look at that. Look at that.
We have keep with us always.
It's a beautiful book, absolutely beautiful book. And it's available obviously over here on things like Amazon and all the major retailers and stuff. And I urge anybody that's a fan of the X-Men show to obviously go and pick up a copy, because it's just a dive into nostalgia. And sort of, as you say, back in 92, that was before, I think that was before Google was even invented. Let's be honest.
There was no internet.
Was there no internet at all? See, I'm a bit foggy on this about when the internet officially.
There were a few wires up there, but to give you an idea, I think a photograph was too much to send.
Yes.
Wow.
Much less a movie. And if I wanted to send a script to another writer, which is now, it's not even a megabyte file. It would go in a nanosecond now. I could send 1,000 of them in a second. That would take about half an hour.
Wow.
To go from my computer to a message board, then the writer would have to call up on the message board and then download it. So it was an hour process sending a tiny file. You didn't have email, you didn't know. I mean, you could obviously do something that primitive, but with no internet as we know it today.
We had fax machines.
Yeah. if I wanted to get something to across country, the fax machine was the hot ticket.
That was the way to do it. But the reason I mention that is because obviously in the book there's so many, there's so many illustrations, so many details, so much text, etc., that it really kind of it's all, the way I look at it is, it's the kind of stuff I would have looked up on the internet if the internet was invented when I was watching the show, if that makes sense. That's how I've described it to people. And it's just, I know that you guys wrote it, so I'm not just kind of blowing smoke, but it is so well put together for a fan. It feels like it's really put together for people to fill in those blanks and kind of understand the kind of workings behind certain things and stuff. So thank you for putting it together. But anybody that is watching that hasn't read it, go and pick up a copy, get a copy from the library, wherever. Just if you're a fan of X-Men, you need to see this book. So Julia, you said that you wrote a couple of episodes. Specifically, it was Dark Phoenix was one of the ones that you worked on, wasn't it?
A little earlier, it was Days of Future Past, part 1 and 2 in the first 13. And I wrote part 1 of that, number 11 in the series lineup. And Eric mentioned it, but again, when he got tapped to develop this show for Fox Kids, you were only given 13 episodes. That was it. No one had confidence that it was going to go beyond 13. So I was fortunate to get hired on to do an episode, which was Days of Future Past. But there is a certain innocence of ignorance that it's like, this is one of the crown jewels in the Marvel family. Okay, I'll do it. If I'd been more well versed, I might have gone, I'm not touching that.
If we'd been bigger fans, we might have been more intimidated by the job.
But I think to be honest with you, like, you know, even now watching back those episodes, you know, and the reason I mentioned the Dark Phoenix as well is because that's the most recent kind of movie adaptation that they've made. But they did Days of Futures Past as well. But you know, even back in the day, they made so much sense. And I think if you were more of a fan, you probably wouldn't have touched it, but you did it so much justice. Like there wasn't, you know, I don't think, even now watching it back, I don't kind of think, oh, you know, that it would have been better if, or, you know, or they missed it. It's just, I can enjoy it for what it is, and it fills in those gaps in the storyline. And there's, you know, you look back at any piece of artwork, you would always look back at it and kind of go, oh, I could have done this, or I should have done this. And of course you can. But,
we've had 30 years to look back.
But honestly, as a fan, for what it is, it was brilliant. And what I like so much about it, especially now being a father, I've got 4 children myself, but my 2 eldest, my eldest son is massively into Star Wars and superheroes and everything like that. And as soon as X-Men the animated series came onto Disney Plus, because the DVDs are really hard to get hold of, even more so over here. It's just no. Every now and again we have a record store over here called HMV, and every now and again there was, you know, one would pop up or something, but they'd be quite expensive. Or charity shops, people would kind of give them into a charity shop, not realizing what they had. But as soon as it popped up on Disney Plus, I was like, right, to my son, I was like, right, we're sitting down and we're watching this. And he loves it. And even now, 30 years later, kind of at a similar age that I was when I was watching it, sharing that with him, it's very, there's a real kind of meta kind of like relationship going on there, which is really cool, because I'm seeing him react the way that I did. And the reason I mention it is because stories like Days of Future Past, to give him the stack of comic books and go, right, you need to read this because of all the things, but to sit down and watch, you know, 2 20-25-minute episodes, and for him to kind of digest that story and understand it, perfect, absolutely perfect. So here's
different covers from ours.
Yeah, we did have different covers. Okay, so the other thing I think, because obviously being a behind the toys episode, I want to kind of dive into a few different areas that you've done in other interviews and stuff. I will say that, you know, that you've done interviews with a friend of ours, a friend of the show, Powers of X-Men, and it's a great interview that kind of goes into the politics and the stories and everything behind the show. So you know, I urge anyone to go over and check that out on Power of X-Men's podcast, because that's a really great interview as well. The one thing I will say before we kind of move on to a bit more about merchandise and characters and that kind of stuff is that one thing that was so, I keep saying one thing, there were so many good things about this show, but one of my favorite things is that it felt really real. It felt really relatable. And I think that the way that the characters were put together and the way that certain storylines and quite sensitive subjects, you know, even in today's world, were handled for a younger audience was brilliant. And that's what I think that even now, a lot of writers and a lot of, when it comes to films, when it comes to kind of depictions of these stories and these characters, they're missing that the animated series dealt with so well. So do go and watch that interview with Power of X-Men, because you talk about all sorts of stuff about, you know, how you had to get in. So let's talk about you guys. What was your, if you had to pick one, what was your favorite episode and why?
That, believe me, that is so tough. That is so tough. I could be self-serving and say, well, obviously something that one of the ones I wrote, and I'd be happy to do that. But right now, today, talking with you here and thinking about the 30 years and 25 years since the last episode, I have to say, writer Jim Krieg crafted the last episode of the series, Graduation Day. And not many series can stick their landings. But I do believe, and believe me, season 5 was a disaster in terms of budget was slashed. Animation was, oh my God, it was the worst of all worlds. But storytelling wise, there are still some just really great stories in that season. And watching that episode as the finale for the series, I got to give all the credit to that for wrapping up the series in a way that it just feels good.
Yeah. We've done a lot of series, and one of one of the hardest things to do is start it properly so that you set up the world and people want to come back and see the next story, because you're trying to tell a fun story, yet introduce all this material and all these people. So the pilot, Night of the Sentinels, which Mark Edens wrote with me, was really hard. And then again, as he's saying, tying it up at the end, how many strings do you have coming from 76 episodes to where the fan will be satisfied that this, in 20 minutes, that you're telling a story that brings everybody together and kind of says goodbye properly. And so, yeah, that was hard. Just as a favorite story, because the hardest part for me in this whole job for 5 years was coming up with each specific story, because there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories in the books, and some of them didn't really suit, you know, TV well, but even if they did, why pick one rather than another? So, you know, deciding which one, because once I liked something, I pitch it to Marvel and they say, okay, and I pitch it to Fox, they say, okay, yeah, we all agree that this is a solid story. Then it's mostly just a craft, and we've got 20 good writers that worked on the show over the years, and I had confidence that the actual building of the script and the building of the storyboard, because our artists were good, confidence that would work fine. But what kept me up at night was trying to, each season, what 13 stories to tell, or what 13 episodes. Some of them were multi-parters. And so once in a while, one would come to you and say, that's gonna be great. That so works. It seems like such an X-Men story. I'm sold in a heartbeat, and I know the other people are gonna love it. So the one that hits me the most, that I remember most having that aha moment, probably at midnight, was One Man's Worth, where where there's a plot to go back in time and kill Xavier in college, kill him before he can form the X-Men. So there are no X-Men in the world, and now the world's completely changed. And that one, it was really hard. What is it? The time travel stories are incredibly hard, and really you can't really properly make the logic work. You just have to kind of go with it, because if you think about it long enough, you'll go crazy. All the different, if he came back before this, if he came back before this, just drives you mad. But just the basic setup just was a really emotional one for me and for the people that were involved writing it. Richard Mueller did the basic story. He's a wonderful guy. There are two reference points in my mind were It's a Wonderful Life, where the angel shows Jimmy Stewart, this is what would happen if you had never lived. And this is how the world would turn bleak and dark. And the other one was a Star Trek episode from the second season of the original series called City on the Edge of Forever, and by Harlan Ellison, where the same kind of thing is shown, like, if this woman lives, the entire history of the planet is different. But she's about to walk across the street and Kirk has to let her die, because he's been shown that if she doesn't die, which is the normal way of things, then everything that we know about our current existence is going to turn upside down. She was that important to the future of the world. So it just hit me that if we could show what it meant for having the X-Men not be there, that would be a perfect way to describe what it is the X-Men are doing, and why they exist, and why Xavier is going through all this trouble for 30 years to keep a group of people together and train them and protect them and work to have, mutant human integration and make everybody live properly together. Well, here's the reverse. Here's if he didn't bother. And so it was, to me, it was really, I just got it immediately. So that was really satisfying.
And in that two-parter, to me, it again, this is fourth season, right? I think, yeah. In that two-parter, in the horrible alternate verse where Xavier had not formed the X-Men, we see the X-Men in various.
A couple of their characters. They're not X-Men. They don't know what that word X-Men means, but
trying to survive.
We see Wolverine and Storm and a couple other folks running around trying to survive.
And then we see Wolverine and Storm together as a couple in this alternate universe. And they're married and they are deeply in love and they're happy with each other in this horrible hellscape. And it's like, of course they should be together. They're the perfect couple.
Yeah,
It makes perfect sense.
it's.
So then,
I know exactly the episode you're talking about, and it's funny enough. I actually watched it this week. Whether you believe that or not, I actually watched that one this week because it's where, as you say, Storm and Wolverine are in relationship together and stuff, and you see their alternate costumes as well, the kind of futuristic costumes. But I think my favorite part in that whole episode, just to prove I'm not bluffing, is where it kind of cuts back at the end, and she gives him that, "Oh, Wolverine, are you flirting with me?" line.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And those two characters, this is just shows how much we depend on the performance and the artwork. Those two characters, in their voices, you just really felt that was such a nice little line from her, the way she delivered it. It just gave you goosebumps.
Allison Smith.
And the way they drew her kind of looking just gently over towards him. That's the way we hope to see it. But a lot of times you write something, you hope, and then you see it and say, "Oh my God, what were they thinking when they drew it, or what were they thinking when they recorded it?" But all this wonderful team came together and made that last scene really.
It was a very good story. I enjoyed that one. Interestingly, sorry, Judah.
Here is that it looks like Age of Apocalypse, the huge series arc that came out in the books around that same time.
About 6 months later, that was Bob liked the story. Bob Harris at Marvel liked the story, and there was some confusion because it took so long to produce this one that as they were doing the storyboard and sending it over to the animators, they had started designing Age of Apocalypse
because they liked the idea so much from one man's work.
We've been working on this for 7 or 8 months.
Wow!
They thought, we've got this cool new idea we'll use their idea, but they'll do something new and special with it. But while they started, they had their design team do some designs, and Larry Houston, our head artist, saw them just before he sent over the designs to the animators. He said, "Wait a minute, we could work in some of these designs that they're going to use in a book 6 months from now." And he loved doing stuff like that and putting characters in that shouldn't be there.
Well, and so for folks think, One Man's Worth is from Age of Apocalypse. No. Age of Apocalypse was inspired in its own way from One Man's Worth. So it's nice to pay back the comics.
Yeah, we took so many good stories, so many good moments from
Age of Apocalypse became such an iconic one, that so many fans, some people's introduction to X-Men was through Age of Apocalypse. So, to know that, the animated series had so much influence on that is really cool. It's interesting, the other two that you mentioned as well, like the pilot, for example, the Sentinel. I don't know if you saw the Sentinel that Hasbro produced. The big one. I've got the big one there. I couldn't say no as a X-Men fan, and they didn't open it to the UK markets initially when it first started. It wasn't open to us, and it was about, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably about a week or so into the actual funding of the project that they figured out a way to get it to the UK market, and then it just obviously skyrocketed. But I remember seeing the kind of teaser that they put out for this HasLab project, and they used pretty much frame for frame parts of that pilot. And as soon as any animated series fan saw that kind of tease, you're like, it's a Sentinel. Hands down, they're doing a Sentinel. Like it's a Sentinel. That's it. There's no two ways about it. And the graduation day, the kind of final episode, watching it back in the 90s when I watched it originally, I didn't notice the change in animation and stuff because it was just X-Men to me. As a kid, as a younger person, I was just pleased to have them on the screen. But watching that episode back as an adult, I didn't realize how deep it was and how kind of well written it really was, and how it really does, like you say, just kind of puts that final point in the story and comfortably concludes it. You were kind of left there wanting to see them again, the way they all stood there looking out into the sunset. And who knows, 30 years later they might revisit it. So but we'll talk about that later on. While we're talking about characters, who I'm really going to put you on the spot here, not the voice talent necessarily, but the characters. Who was your favorite, let's say, like main character, and who was your favorite I don't want to say supporting character, but kind of, because it was so many characters, you brought in the full roster of everyone, like there were so many characters, but kind of outside of the core team? Who's your favorite core and who's your favorite secondary character?
As a writer for the show, and most folks who have worked on it kind of agree with me in terms of being a writer, Beast was so much fun to write for, because Beast himself was the smartest person in the room. He had the clever lines, the dry wit, he was a romantic, and this shows you how long ago it was when you put the first call to action, Bartlett's quotations thing from Beast in the two-parter to begin with. That became a challenge for the rest of us as writers. It's like, if Beast is going to say something, let's try and find an obscure quote that he would use, that he would pull and say in those moments. And that became fun. But again, that was pre-Google. So that literally was Bartlett's.
Dusty old books.
Dusty old books.
Yeah. We writers weren't that well read. We had to look up. I'm going to say two characters. I never got the chance to write for Nightcrawler on an episode, and he just a fascinating character to me. Also, we didn't get a chance to explore Jubilee's foster parents. And this sounds silly, but if there were time to go back and look at that differently, I mean, they have the issue of this young person they've taken in as foster parents. She's a mutant at a time when, oh my God, I would like to have tried to do a little more with what's going on family-wise and what that means in the foster care system and for Jubilee and for these people, because we do see her go back and visit them in a later episode, and she's splashing in the swimming pool with them in the backyard. Seriously, secondary.
I know. Yeah. Well, you asked.
Nice. No, but that's it. That's really interesting. What about yourself, Eric? What about yourself?
Well, for the main group, we've had time to think about this, and obviously we had to love all the characters to write them. And Wolverine was everybody immediately. He's such a colorful character that we actually had to pull back and try to write him less, because if you're writing a scene and you wanted some drama, you just have that man walk in the room and you've got some electricity going. So, but for myself, oddly, my answer to this is one that fans almost never give, and that is I empathized most with Xavier, because here I was kind of like the father figure on the show, and 20 different writers working for me over the 5 years trying to get these scripts out. Very different people, very different moods, talents, abilities, vulnerabilities, and just trying to keep it all smooth and coordinated. I felt very Xavier-like dealing with my ex. So there's very great empathy there. And as far as the secondary characters, there's one I really loved. I can't think of his name right now. The Phalanx. In the Phalanx story, the end is a two-parter.
Let's see if I can look.
Beast.
Was that planned? Was that?
Yeah, it was. It was, Beast. The X-Men are just getting decimated, and Beast befriends this kind of lonely, sad character who is part of the Phalanx.
Oh yeah. And
who keeps on referring to Beast as Friend Hank. And there's a picture of him right here.
Yeah, Phalanx Covenant.
Phalanx Covenant.
Oh yeah. Whoa.
He is called Warlock.
Oh, okay.
And he refers to Beast as Friend Hank all the time. And the actor who did him just did a really wistful job. I mean, this is a doomed character that's helping Hank save the X-Men from extinction from the rest of the Phalanx, and he's just a sweet character.
Yeah. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because as I said, there was such a huge roster, and you brought in so many different characters from different teams, from different story arcs, that we were just over not spoiled, but it was enough to fill in blanks from the comics. It really felt like as I said, said to you before, that if I was missing something, there was enough in the episodes with the characters. And even if it was just a kind of a flash in the pan that character's in the background. Oh, I know who that is because he's in this story, and it was enough, which was brilliant. And to really appreciate that for what it was animation wise back in the 90s, because it wasn't CGI, it wasn't computer, was it? It was like paintings and drawings, and you know, a lot of work went to putting in particular characters and the artwork and stuff, and so I can completely appreciate that. So that was brilliant as a fan. So as you can tell, I just loved it all. I loved everything. So there's a couple of characters I want to just for your, in case you cared. My favorite was Gambit, hands down was Gambit. There was just something really cool about Gambit, and the way he spoke, the long trench coat, the way he kind of had this on-off kind of romance with Rogue. And for me, it was a character that when I read him, I didn't have a voice for. Interestingly enough, I couldn't, you know, whether it was from where I was from, I couldn't picture a voice in my head. And then watching him on screen, he had this, you know, the Cajun accent, and I didn't relate to him. I think I wanted to be him as a kid. You know, it's like, it was just, even to the extent of like, how can you pull off kind of a face mask with hair coming out the top and still be really cool? Like, it's so he was hands down my favorite. So I got to touch on a couple of characters. So sure. You've probably heard this a million times, and I'm pretty sure you give the answer in the book. So if you do, just say it's in the book and we'll just plug the book a little bit more. But there's that green guy in the credits, that in the opening credits. The answer is in the book, isn't it? About who he is. Yeah. Yep. And it's, so I'm not going to say it here because I know the answer because I've read it. But it's one of these arguments that goes on for, you know, with, I say arguments, it's a friendly debate in the collector and the geek community about who he is and why he's in there, because we do see him again in an episode kind of in the background. He was kind of drawn in and stuff. But there's so many arguments about who he is and why he's there and stuff.
Why he's there.
It is.
And the artist had it wrong for a while. When we started going to cons about 5 years ago and tried to answer that question, we asked Larry, because he drew it, at Larry Houston, and he said, you know what, I'm not sure. I think that may have been a mistake by the Korean animators, and we just never caught it. And that was a really mysterious answer. Like, why would they put that guy in? And then they said, oh no, that's Gremlin, or I mean, it's the little guy. And it was just a case of Larry had forgotten that he just needed a seventh character to balance
that person there.
The villains.
To run at the screen.
And at the time it was designed, we hadn't written the scripts yet, so he had to just kind of figure out who to throw at each other. And he knew it was going to be Magneto. And the reason that Warpath is in there for the villains, even though we never really use him much in the story, is that we had designed his twin brother Thunderbird to be part of the core X-Men group, and then changed our minds at the last second. So a design already existed. So that saved him some drawing time. That's the reason that Warpath is part of the villains in the opening sequence, is that we already had put the time into designing his brother. For no other reason. You know, we hadn't planned to use him in an episode, but that's why he was there.
Obviously, Hasbro and Marvel Legends, that's my kind of collection, as you can probably tell from behind me. I've got quite a few. But if they did one of that green guy and called him whoever, even if they called him Credit Guy, it would sell. It would sell, because so many people are like, who is this? And there's customizers out there that have kind of customized versions of him and stuff. And it's one of them characters that, you know, that little mistake has become almost kind of, you know, not, you know, it's like pop culture kind of, like, as in that we want him. So
we've got a Gambit mistake for you.
If you like Gambit,
she found it. Larry didn't know it. If you pause the opening,
when Gambit's throwing his cards, take a look.
Yep.
Can you see the 3 cards he's got there?
Check out the aces. What does Ace of Spades look like?
The pip is upside down.
Oh yeah.
It goes by so fast you don't catch it.
And that was not Larry did. That was a mistake. that was absolutely. Because, oh damn, I drew it upside down. This was not some sort of.
Gambit's not my favorite now. He's not as cool as I thought he was. That's it. Thanks, Eric and Julia.
He's got his own marked card.
Yeah.
He's always that way.
That's very cool. So okay. Yeah, so two other characters that I got to talk about, kind of tie into merchandise. You mentioned Beast. Interestingly enough, we haven't had an animated Beast figure in the modern Hasbro Legends. We've had a blue beast, we've had a grey beast, we've had Age of Apocalypse beast, but they haven't produced an animated style head. And for so many people, that's how Beast looks. That's the Hank that people want. And there's 3D printers out there, there's customizers that have kind of created an animated style head, but they haven't created one. So I'm really hoping, and we'll talk about the VHS figures that they're releasing, because I know you guys had an involvement in that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I really, 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 really hope that one of the ones down the line is going to be Beast, because it'll make so many of us happy. It really will.
It may have gotten into the books, it may not, but the general Will Mineo, who was the overall supervisor the first year and made an awful lot of decisions about the way the show looked and
on the art side,
about the details of the characters, and was
gifted artist,
and a lifelong Marvel crazed guy from the time he was 6 or 7, and it must be 70 now. Anyway, he had a very strong feeling about Beast. He let some of his staff draw some of the other characters and said, okay, that's close enough. And Mark said, no, I'm going to do Beast for the show because, quote unquote, nobody designs Beast broadly enough. In other words, he'd keep on getting artists' renderings of Beast, and he'd be too normally proportioned. And he says, no, Beast just needs to be slightly unnaturally broad. And that to him was just a crucial, it made him seem heavy and gave him just weight that he said, if you don't do it, he looks too normal to me. And so that was an obsession of Will's. And the reason that our sweet Beast is a little wider looking than maybe some of the other comic artists have drawn him, or even some of the early toys would have made him. But that was all Will. He willed that into being. He said, my Beast has to be broad enough.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. But he is for so many people, that's how Beast looks, and that's the action figure. And they've been, Hasbro have been giving us so much kind of nostalgia and kind of tips towards the Jim Lee style and the animated series style. So I really hope that the Beast is in that VHS box set. So there is one other character that I've got to mention, because obviously, you probably know who it's going to be. But it's Morph. Morph is, was put together for the TV show. He was an original character for the TV show, which even now people kind of debate and argue. Oh no, he's this, because there is a Morph character in the comic books and stuff, but the Morph that we see in the animated series was written for the TV show. And we obviously haven't had a figure of him yet. We haven't had something, but he's another one that people are just going like, give us a Morph, because he became, he was such a fan favorite that you guys wrote him back in, didn't you? Because he later came back in.
Well,
we did.
Okay.
Okay. He was supposed to stay dead. And listen, I'm telling you this, 30 years ago, children's broadcast standards and practices. The woman in charge
allowed us to kill one of the lead characters in the first story, which was unheard of.
For a Saturday morning kids animated show, which this was. Avery Coburn understood the book. She understood what X-Men was. And when you said, well, we're going to have to kill someone in order to prove that there are consequences and that sacrifice is authentic.
Yep.
And you told me that, and I said, well, good luck. That's never going to happen on Saturday morning show. But you and Mark Eden spoke and discussed this, debated it with Avery Coburn, with Margaret Lesh at Fox Kids, and Sydney Iwanter, her executive.
And Fox backed us up on it.
So he was supposed to stay dead. I swear to God. And truly, there are people who that was the first time I experienced that kind of moment, or that kind of grief in my life.
A lot of kids were really hit by that.
So then, 13 episodes. That's it. The show's done. We were all let go, and we're doing different jobs and stuff. And you were working on Exo Squad when you get the call saying, "Oh, we're going to do a second season. Please come back."
However, we did. We asked a bunch of room full of ninth graders. I mean, not grade 9-year-olds. A room full of 9-year-olds who their favorite character was, and Morph won by a landslide. So he said, "Is there any way you can bring him back?" Because he was killed off screen. And so we very reluctantly, and then it ended up having great fun with him for the rest of the series. But we did not want to bring him back. And to answer the absolute truth for fans forever, the first draft of Night of the Sentinels was written with a different character sacrificing himself for the X-Men. It was Thunderbird. Thunderbird was in the first draft of those two scripts, and Thunderbird's the one that got shot and killed.
Wow.
Then somebody, an executive somewhere, said, wait a minute, this is our only Native American character. Do you want to start out the show by shooting the Indian?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is politically wrong. Oh gosh. So literally, the executive asked me, Eric, find a different character to sacrifice. And we tried to always go back to the books and find something that had happened in the books. We used Thunderbird originally because he had sacrificed himself, like in the 5th issue of being an X-Men, he died fighting for the team. So, okay, well, let's use him. Okay, we can't. So I asked Larry Houston, who is an encyclopedia of X-Men, who else has died helping the X-Men? And he gave me a list of 3 or 4. And it happened that the one at the top was named Changeling, who, in 1970 or whatever, in an episode with he's a shapeshifter, and he made himself look like Charles Xavier before some bad guy killed him, and he sacrificed himself so Charles Xavier could live. So he had made the sacrifice. He was only in like 3 issues, period. Had very little dialogue, very little character development. He was close to the design we used, but we made him funnier, goofier, sillier, more fun than the Changeling in the books. And then we wrote a draft of the script with Changeling in it. Okay, and the lawyers called. Said, can't use his name.
Why?
Why? Well,
because DC, right?
DC has a Changeling character. We looked it up and said, but DC came up with theirs 3 years after this one. Doesn't matter.
Don't want the fight.
We don't want the
And the
fight.
worst thing is he's not even called Changeling anymore. He's called like Beast Boy, isn't he?
Yeah. So exactly. So it shouldn't have been a problem. But attorneys are very conservative, and so they said, use the character, just come up with a name for him, different name for him. So I came up with more. But
brilliant.
Based them on the Changeling character from the 3 issues of the book, and we made him lighter and funnier, and we gave him a new name. But that's the progression, where we're looking for a character who had really sacrificed themselves somewhere in the book so the fans would be satisfied, as opposed to just somebody up out of thin air.
And the problem you did in making him likable for each, we see him with each character of the team, and they each have their own positive, warm, fuzzy relationship to him. So never, the word focus group is never a good thing. So, we did a focus group, but it's like, oh no. But I can understand if I was a kid and I'd seen 4 episodes. Morph would probably be my favorite character too, because he made everybody laugh, and Wolverine was so broken up when he home.
He's the only guy that ever made me laugh.
I must admit though, we talk about people being written back in and stuff like that, but at the time there was no, watching it, I didn't think that I was going to see him again. And I think that the difference we have now in cinema is if a character's killed off in a series or in a movie or something like that, 9 out of 10 times he's coming back or she's coming back, that there's going to be some, this happened or it was this person. Whereas back then, at the beginning of the the 90s with the X-Men, that guy was gone. And so as a kid I was kind of like, things have consequences, like the sacrifice means something, so it did hit where I think it was intended to hit. There wasn't, but I think that's one of the reasons why even now for people my age, he's still one of our favorites. And we're kind of saying to these, like to Hasbro, they've given us so many characters, give us a Morph, so I'm really hoping he's in the VHS.
I've got
to share. I've got to share. I do some customizing. Look, here he is. So I do a few customs for myself, but Morph was one. Morph was one that I had to have, and I went for his evil version just because it was a bit cooler looking, wasn't it? So, but yeah, so it's just made up of various different figures that they've given us. So they can do it. It's there. They have the pieces. So I'm happy because I've got a Morph in my collection, but I'm really hoping we get an official one at some point. So, but I had to bring him up. I did have to bring him up. So one last question then quickly about characters that I've got to ask you. Did either of you cameo? Did either of you do a voiceover for anyone in the background or anything at all?
No, I would have loved to have done that, but
They were recording in Toronto, and we
Again.
were writing in Los Angeles. So it's a 2,500 mile
So it just wasn't. I just wonder because
No.
I know some people, they write themselves in, and Stan Lee, for example, was famous for his cameos in the films and stuff. So
we have a tiny cameo. Thanks, you mentioned Spider-Man.
Oh,
Thanks to John Semper. There was a crossover episode in Spider-Man where they were able to use 3 or 4 of the X-Men characters. It took some legal work. It took about a month of letters back and forth among the attorneys, but they allowed them to use, like episodes 55, 56, something like that. And so when they did the crossover, John Semper called me, said, Eric, could you, one of your better guys come over and do the dialogue for these 2 series? Because you know the characters so well. We've got the basic story laid out, but we need somebody that really knows and loves these guys to write the dialogue. So we went over and spent a day and a half with John and the people at Spider-Man writing that stuff in, and he wrote in a villain called Lewald. So somewhere in that Spider-Man the animated series, there's 30 seconds of reference to some evil character named Lewald.
Amazing.
Now that 30 years have passed, if you happen to catch the episodes where the president of the United States in X-Men the animated series it's a female. She's never formally named in the series, but there's a couple shots of her where people come up to me now. Oh, did they use you as the model? And it's like, well, I'm 30 years older now.
I was 30 years old at the time.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I grew into the role.
That's some commitment there that you grew into the.
There you go.
That is brilliant. But that's enough. I will just touch on that because even that, having a female president, it was unheard of. But we watched it and we accepted it. It wasn't questioned. It was like, okay, that's cool. Like that's how it is. Like it's brilliant. But yeah, no, I had to ask if you cameoed because I think maybe now, looking back, sort of how popular it's remained, I think you probably would have put yourself in there somehow if you.
Our younger son,
yes,
Dr. Alec Bolson.
Yeah. In the Beauty and the Beast episode where the girl's blind.
Yep.
Beast's partner at the beginning at the eye clinic, who's his friend who has to disappoint him. Oh, we're gonna have to shut down the clinic because the bad guys hate you mutants, and the girl's father hates you. You can't come in tomorrow. His name's Dr. Alec Bolson, and our younger son is named Alec Bolson Lewald. Our son and the daughter of our closest friend, our closest friend's name's Crocker. His daughter's named Carly Crocker. So Alec is in the episode, and the girl's name is Carly Crocker.
That's lovely. That's nice. That is really cool. Well, I'll just.
In One Man's Worth, when they go blasting back in time, May 11th is our older son's birthday. Not 1959, but
but just those.
All sliding our kids and things in there when we could. That's
really nice. That's really cool. I'm really pleased to see it. Well, obviously, I'm going to come on to 97 in a minute towards the end of this chat. But if you need any British speaking characters in then just you've got my number. So just if there's a line, just give me a call. So let's move on to merchandise. Let's talk merchandise because obviously there's been nowadays looking back at nostalgic stuff. So animated series obviously seen as nostalgic, whereas X-Men and comic books is still very current as well. But the merchandise nowadays is, you can't move for Marvel. Marvel is everywhere. It's such a big company, and for a fan for so many years, it's great. I'm not going to lie. To be able to walk into a shop and pick up a T-shirt that's Marvel, or to go into a bookstore and pick up however many books I want. But merchandise, kind of back when the show was going on, I know you guys had quite a lot of debates and arguments about product placement and stuff like that when it came to the shows. But when it comes to the actual merchandise that was released kind of with the show, do you guys have much? There you go. I know I can see bits and pieces, but whoa, what are those things? Wolverine in a
these almost sank the show.
These are the Australian Happy Meal toys,
which are not mentioned in the big book. They're mentioned in our first book.
That's the Art of X-Men. Is Art of X-Men animated?
It's called Previously on X-Men. It's the first book.
That's the one with the one behind you, the Wolverine and the Cyclops glass, isn't it?
Yeah, the black the black cover.
That's it.
That one, there was a real crisis because what happened was Marvel was struggling financially at the time. There's a smaller company, and they'd sold off the rights to make these toys to Australian Happy Meals. So these were out in Australia. They're Happy Meals toys. They're giving them away, and they had an understanding with the Australian with all McDonald's owners in Australia that Storm would go around the TV show riding in a tricycle. And so there'd be product placement that here's Wolverine coming in his tricycle. And we got, the production company got a phone call saying, you have to put these into every episode. But
she can fly. You understand she can fly.
Yes, and so can Magneto.
You understand she can fly.
And it didn't make any difference. They had paid the check to Marvel, and by God, they were going to get their toys front and center for this new TV show that had. And we'd written all the, most of the scripts by then. We couldn't put this stuff in. It would have ruined the show anyway. Yeah, there's Wolverine in his tricycle.
How you would,
And push came to shove, and like the entire creative cast said, no way. And it lasted about a week. Yeah. There was a standoff. And the production company came to all of us and said, we may all get fired over this. But we all just said, it doesn't matter. We'd rather get fired than do a show with it.
That's wrong.
And someone among the good partners came up with the money, handled it, and we didn't have to do that product placement. But that was a very real crisis while we were writing and drawing the first season.
That's crazy. It would have changed.
And
these
are available. You can probably get these for about £10 online
on eBay.
Really?
On eBay.
They are.
But I think they're a prime example of what I'm saying about kind of 90s kind of merchandise, is because the X-Men in buggies, in tricycles, isn't, they weren't in the show. They're not something that even really makes sense. But hey, we'll do it. We'll put the X-Men in color coded, buggies, and we'll sell that. And that's what I think I loved about merchandise in the 90s, is that you would get walkie-talkies with faces on, and you would get kind of you've got no way have you got if there you go walkie-talkie. That's a really cool one. That's a really good one.
And we did get a phone call late when Avi Arad came on.
Speaking of phone calls, he was owner
Playmates Toys, and it just came on and I guess bought into Marvel, whatever, was a person of consequence on the show. And he kind of realized that he didn't have the leverage. Normally, he just say, do it. Yeah. Oh, and the Wolverine telephone.
Wow.
He literally said, we need you to do what you can about, we realize it's late. We realize you got your scripts written. Is there any way, and he was, again, very professional about this, is any way you could put any of what little merchandise we have? They had, I think, some Wolverine curtains and some X-Men sheets and the telephone. And we just said, our Wolverine wouldn't call on a Wolverine telephone and wouldn't wear Wolverine pajamas.
That's a thing of beauty, though. That is a thing of beauty.
So we had that discussion, and if times had been a little different, or if he'd had a little more leverage, if it were a little earlier, they might have insisted. We said, "Look, you've got a Blackbird. We'll double the images of the Blackbird that we normally just would have written to make the stories go forward.
The jet.
We'll have more images of the jet doing cool stuff. How's that?"
Yeah.
And thank you for tossing me a bone, But, so this was the kind of stuff that people honestly in the 90s and certainly in the 80s wouldn't even think about. Oh, that's going to ruin the tone of the show. That's going to no. We need product placement, and we got the phone calls about it.
Yeah.
So,
that's on your Wolverine phone, because you had that plugged in. Let's be honest, that was what you were taking. Wow. And obviously, at the time, it was a debate, an argument, and obviously you were looking after your product, you were looking after your creation. But being able to look back now at some of the crazy merchandise, I mean, what's your favorite piece? What do you think your favorite piece was?
The pasta.
Oh wow! Is that actually?
Fortunately, it's a bank, so we don't have to worry about it exploding.
We got an old one when we were doing the book. We found an old one that actually had the pasta still in it.
That was not pretty.
It was rotten.
And here are these are the figures you were supposed to have been able to see, which I'm not sure in terms of pasta you could have seen
how they would look. But we would know that we were eating Wolverine and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
We would buy into it. Come on, it's got the picture on the front. We'd buy into it.
We've got Valentine's.
Oh, and there were Valentine's in 1993 and 4 and 5. They had a box of Valentine's out. That was so. No, and you can. We've been, dutifully collecting and storing and
of course, costumes are in 1993 for Halloween. Our son went as Wolverine. These were his little claws.
Fantastic.
When he was 4 or 3.
Fantastic.
3 years old, he went as Wolverine.
There is a fast food restaurant over here called Hardee's, on which, depending on which side of the Mississippi, and they had X-Men Pogs. Now
that's just 2 lots of nostalgia in one there. Pogs and X-Men just sandwiched together like that.
Right there.
That's amazing. Do people buy you stuff? Do they buy you X-Men related stuff as gifts? And do they think, I know what Eric
what a great
and
idea.
Like?
What an excellent idea. Anyone listening? Excellent. It's been fun. People will come to us on occasions when we've been able to go out and to sign things, and it's delightful to see what's out there. I mean, things that
they'll bring their old Pizza Hut. Yeah,
that was actually going to be my leading question. I was going to say conventions.
Here's the box the pizza came in.
Wow.
Here's the cup with an X cover. And
so
then you get the 2 tapes. You have to pay for the tapes.
Yeah.
For the pilot.
So what was the most bizarre thing that somebody's asked you to sign X-Men related?
Gee.
Is anything stick in your mind as
nothing, salacious.
Nothing out there.
Nothing horrifying. So
no, fair enough. Okay, so I think that naturally takes us into kind of more modern merchandise. Now, you guys are obviously involved in Hasbro PulseCon 2021. Fun fact, here you go. I don't know if you know this, but Hasbro actually invited a group of us to be part of the fan wall. So there was a wall of people in the background. There was about 20 people in the background.
Yes.
And I was one of them. So I was watching. Yeah. So Super Sorrel, that's my co-host on the Geek Week in Review. He was on day 1 with the Star Wars reveals and stuff. And I was on day 2 for the X-Men. So I actually got to watch, and I was one of the faces that got the reaction that they kind of cut back and they reacted. So, it's a nice little tie in there. But obviously you guys got to reveal that, which is an incredible honor, incredible, thing to be able to do.
Amazing. I still can't believe
the cover was done by one of the guys that actually did storyboards for our show back in the 90s.
Dan Wiesenmeyer.
But they hired him to do the cover.
Yeah, so that's authentic X-Men stuff too. And the shading on these are just
it's the cell shading design on them are fantastic. I mean, one thing that Hasbro is definitely doing now, which is great, is that they're getting involved with a lot of creators and a lot of artists and people like yourselves to actually reveal the figures. And I think that that's actually come from the back of the pandemic and lockdowns and that kind of stuff, where things used to be announced at conventions, doing it online. And personally, I'm going to say I much prefer it this way, because to be able to see folks like yourselves reveal the figures that are so closely related to things that you've worked on makes so much it makes it so much more personal than just kind of the guys who made the figure. And seeing artists, for example, reveal figures that are tied in with the comic books that they've spent time writing and stuff. And also people, like I mentioned Super Sorrel earlier, he got to reveal I think it was Mastermind from the X-Men box set. They sent that over to him and he got to reveal that for the first time, which X-Men, we're going to speak to you on the Geek Week in Review, so I'm sure Sorrel's going to want to talk to you about that, because he's a big X-Men fan as well. But being able to do that has, it's a brilliant move, both on a marketing perspective, but also on a kind of a fan service perspective by Hasbro. So when I saw you guys pop up, I was like, I know what's coming. And I know what's coming, and this is what we've been waiting for. And obviously it was Wolverine and Jubilee that you guys had. You had, I think, if I remember correctly, you had the box of Jubilee, and you had the in-hand picture of in-hand figure of Wolverine. And then later on, I think it was about a week or so later, they also announced a Mr. Sinister as well. But that's all we've had so far. That's all we've seen. I'm guessing there's a few more, and as I said, we
haven't seen much either. They're taking their time, to let them out. So
we know nothing.
Yeah.
We've seen nothing.
You mentioned something about before we go, wanting to just let you know that yes, we're thrilled to hear that they're doing that Marvel's doing a new version of the animated show and a continuation of our show that's going to be coming out next year. And they were nice enough to ask us on as consulting producers,
along with Larry Houston.
Along with the head art guy from our show, Larry Houston. And it's just been thrilled because when we met the folks that are doing the show, it's like 60 people, age 25 to 35,
all in a Zoom room.
All in a Zoom room. All of them had stacks of X-Men toys all around them. And
I wasn't on that call, just for clarification. I might have fit the bill, but I wasn't on that call.
But just seeing the enthusiasm and of the new generation of people coming up and taking the baton for the next run and see what they do. And the fact that instead of just, we're just going to do some sort of X-Men animated show, or we're going to do something very different, that's our own, that's just, it's nothing to do with what we've done before. They're so respectful and so emotionally connected to the first show, to our show, that it is very much, they told us, look, this is not something different. We are going to have our own stories and our own themes and our own focuses, but this is a continuation of what we did, of the 76 episodes we did back then.
Yeah, and I think it's just all perfectly timed. Having these figures released, having these figures announced, is great for us kind of older collectors that I'll be purchasing, or I've pre-ordered them. Don't worry, they're in the bag. They're on their way when they come out. But for me, they will be representative of what I saw in the 90s, my version of the animated show. However, if I bought one for my son, it will be Wolverine based on that 97, X-Men 97. And it's such a lovely kind of crossover that means so much. So somebody obviously knew what they were doing there. Let's be honest, things were done in the right place. But what I was going to say is that obviously we've got Wolverine, we've got Jubilee, they're two main characters. Now, the designs of the characters are based very much on the Jim Lee designs, the iconic kind of Jim Lee design. And what's if I got my history right here as well, it was around the same time that Jim Lee left Marvel that the X-Men animated series was going on. And there was, and I know that in the book you talk about the kind of the redesigns that never surfaced, that hopefully somebody will find them somewhere. I'd love to see them, because the customizers in the community would go mad creating the figures based on the alternate versions. But because of sticking with those designs, yes, Jim Lee's designs in the comic books are fantastic and all the rest of it, but the animated series look of the characters is what so many collectors want to collect as an X-Men. So, when it comes to releasing the figures, they'll do an X-Men wave, or they'll do a mixed wave, and there'll be kind of the odd character here or there. Characters like Wolverine, we get lots of. Excuse me, we get lots of Wolverines, but it's that yellow one. It's that yellow Wolverine, and it's that iconic look. So even though we've had one similar, that one is there we go. That is the animated style. And even down to the extent of, characters like Rogue. Rogue was such she came out in the kind of Jim Lee style, which obviously mirrored the animated series, but the hair was very different. And she became so sought after that the aftermarket price was ridiculous. People were paying like $150 for this figure, because it was the Rogue that matched the Jim Lee stroke animated series design. And then they re-released her on the retro card with the bigger hair and much more in style of the animated series and the Jim Lee design. So, it really has, even though there's so many arcs of comic books and there's so much depth when it comes to the X-Men and the characters and stuff like that, the animated series really did become a definitive version for so many fans, even crossing over into collecting communities. And, you can go onto any of the Facebook groups or talk in any of the kind of discussions and stuff. If you ask people for an X-Men setup that they wanted in their collection, it's the animated style. It's the Jim Lee style, the animated style. They might love the others and all the rest of it. And ironically, what happens is we get, so Age of Apocalypse, for example, we've had 2 full waves of 7 figures and a builder figure of Age of Apocalypse. Like, you can go into the shop, you can buy all 7, all Age of Apocalypse costumes. The animated series, they haven't done that yet. And so when we saw those VHS tapes pop up, we were like, this is it. This is the moment that so many collectors have waited for. So I am looking forward to seeing where else that goes. And I was so pleased, as I probably speak for so many of us, to see you guys involved in obviously being a part of that reveal. So thank you for your enthusiasm as well, because you were both really excited by it as well, which just showed your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll kind of round up a little bit. Obviously you touched on X-Men 97. I can't do an interview with you guys on the 30th anniversary of the call in the 30th anniversary without, obviously, was it on the Wolverine phone?
It was not on the Wolverine phone. I apologize.
No, of course it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. But obviously, without touching on it, now I'm not gonna pry, because, as you say, you know, it's a different group of people and stuff. Was you surprised to see it have a revival, though? Were you surprised that, you know, 30 years after, they were going, this is something that we want to continue?
It's astounding, because, you know, to us it was our day job. You know, this is maybe the 20th different show I'd worked on after 7 years.
We've each worked on about 40 different animated series and live action over the course of our careers.
And it just becomes, okay, you work on one show for a few months, and then if you're on staff somewhere, they take you off that and put you on something else where they need you. Or if you're freelancing, you get a couple episodes with Ninja Turtles, and then you get a couple over here, you know, with Transformers or whatever, whoever's hiring. It's rent, it's mortgage money and diapers
for the children, for the kids.
In our minds, it's okay. We're freelance artists in a competitive world out here. We're getting this wonderful job to do, but as soon as each job's done, we're kind of, you know, waiting around the phone to see if we get another phone call. So the fact this lasted 5 years was wonderful. At the time, since when it was so successful at the time, we weren't thinking about history. We were thinking about this might last the way other things have lasted, like, you know, Star Trek or Sherlock Holmes or whatever has been done a dozen times. We didn't know that it would last this long and it would still be pleasing people later. At the time, it was simply, this means we're not going to try to talk out of doing the show we wanted to do. Because the first season, there were a lot of different ideas about what might make a successful show before it had aired. And so there's a great creative struggle there to keep it on track and keep it the way we thought it would be best. As soon as it was a hit, as soon as it was a big deal and everyone was making money, then all that went away. Then it was all, oh yeah, you guys are doing a wonderful job. Just keep it up, keep it up. And so for the next 4 years, we didn't really have any, you know, creative battles. There might have been a specific story, but everybody was on board and everybody was supportive and everybody was thrilled that we were part of something so successful. Well, okay, we're done and we're working on other shows over the next years. And most of the shows we've worked on in the past, there's some people that remember them fondly. And there's, you know, like the Disney shows we worked on, there's great love and, you know, nostalgia for those, but nothing like this. It's just hit at a time when, I don't know what it was in England, but there were 3 or 4 TV networks here. And on a Saturday morning or a Thursday afternoon, if this played after school, over half the televisions in America and Canada were watching our show. Now a big popular show, maybe 5% are watching the show. But at the time, there weren't that many options. And if what you were doing was successful, every kid at the playground knew this show. It was just part of the culture. And then we started thinking, how many different countries? Because we talked to people. Fox was great at getting it all over the world. People all over the world saw this. So if we're getting 15, 20 million people watching it every week here, you know, multiply that by 10 or 20, you're getting hundreds of millions of people watching a little story that we banged out in a week on our dining room table. And that's very, and then they're still watching it 30 years later, makes it even more gratifying.
Yeah. I think what looking back at it, I think one of the things that made it so successful, or two parts of the things that made it so successful as a viewer, is the continuation of stories. The kind of to be continued, that you've got to come back and watch what's next, because you became invested, and also the fact that the villains weren't kind of a dime a dozen kind of villains. It wasn't kind of like, here's one, the X-Men defeated him, well, hey, we move on. There was story arcs, and even to the extent of the way that the graduation day episode ends, and obviously we see Professor X go off, and he goes off with the Shi'ar and stuff. Is he going to come back? Who knows? No, I'm only joking. But he's gone off, and Magneto stood there with the X-Men. It's kind of like, and you've seen this villain that's kind of had this real journey and this kind of full circle, and then he's stood shoulder to shoulder with the heroes at the end. It was just beautifully written, and just I think it stands the test of time, because as a child you could watch it and enjoy it and become invested in it, but as an adult you can still watch it and invested. And I think what's so for me personally, what's so brilliant about the 97 reveal is, as I mentioned earlier, I've watched this with my son. I've watched the X-Men animated series with my son, mainly as an excuse to rewatch it myself to start with. But it was kind of a case of, I'm sitting down to watch this, you're into your X-Men, you need to watch this. This was my Bible as a kid. And we sat down, and then when that was announced, there's going to be another series. And I was like, there's going to be another series. So to have that kind of, for us to both be excited about something new from a place of enjoying it as something old and something that, it was just very poetic. So I think that's why there's so much hype about it. And I think if they continue with what you guys, the foundation that you guys set, they can't go wrong. I really don't think. And I think the fact that they've got you guys and Larry Houston on board as well is a real positive sign. And I think I speak for most of the fandom when we say that we're all very, very excited to see where it comes, and where my British speaking character pops up as well. That would be
we'll let you know.
Guys, if for anybody that's watching, how do people follow you? Just drop your socials. What are your socials?
X-Men TAS for X-Men the Animated Series. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, all X-Men TAS, and we have a website, xmentas.com. So please find us. I try and be active way too much on there, but just having fun and remembering and looking forward. So that's
brilliant. No, but Julia, Eric, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Cannot wait for X-Men 97. Absolutely love the original. Thanks very much for joining us, and all the best.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
What an amazing pair. I really enjoyed that. Hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. Please do like, share, subscribe, all of those things. All support to the channel is very much appreciated. Stay tuned for some more Behind the Toys interviews coming very soon.